That night the house no longer felt like home. Felt like a tomb. Victor's boots still rested beside the front door exactly where he left them. His old brown jacket still hung near the hallway. The kitchen still smelled faintly like the coffee he drank every morning before leaving for work. Grief is cruel because it traps people everywhere around you. Their voice disappears, but their presence stays behind like ghosts. I sat alone in the darkness for hours after the funeral, unable to stop shaking. That message kept replaying inside my head. Don't trust the boys. At first I tried convincing myself it had to be some terrible prank. Maybe someone in town wanted attention. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. But every time I closed my eyes, I remembered Daniel's frightened face at the cemetery. Not grief. Fear. And then more memories started returning. Over the last year my sons had changed completely. Money transformed them into strangers. Daniel worked in real estate now and constantly bragged about expensive houses and investments. Simon followed him everywhere like a shadow. Their conversations no longer sounded warm or loving. Everything became about profit, property, insurance, and inheritance. For months they pressured Victor to sell our home. Dad, this place is falling apart. You and Mom should move somewhere smaller. You're too old to manage your finances. At the time Victor always laughed it off calmly. He loved our little house. Every wall held memories of our children growing up. Every crack in the floor carried part of our history together. But Daniel hated that house. Now I finally understood why. Around midnight I grabbed an old flashlight and walked outside toward Victor's workshop behind the house. Rainwater dripped from the roof while cold wind moved through the trees. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door. The familiar smell of oil, wood, metal, and dust hit me instantly. And I froze. The workshop looked completely normal. Too normal. According to my sons, a machine explosion caused Victor's injuries. But there were no burn marks anywhere. No broken equipment. No destroyed walls. Every tool sat perfectly organized exactly the way Victor always kept them. Nothing looked damaged. A terrible chill moved down my spine. Slowly I walked toward Victor's desk in the corner of the room. My breathing became uneven as I opened the top drawer. Inside sat a small brown envelope. My name was written across the front in Victor's handwriting. I immediately felt tears fill my eyes. Carefully I opened it. Inside was a folded handwritten letter. Margaret, if you are reading this, something bad has happened to me. I don't trust Daniel and Simon anymore. They've been pressuring me about insurance policies and bank documents. Something feels wrong. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. Victor knew. My husband knew he was in danger before he died. But the nightmare became even worse seconds later. Beneath the letter sat several insurance papers. Recently updated. The life insurance payout had increased almost 4 times within 6 months. And both of my sons were listed as beneficiaries. My heart started pounding violently. That's when my phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number appeared. Victor was poisoned. Go to the hospital tomorrow. Ask for the real medical report. Poisoned. Not burned. Not injured. Poisoned. Suddenly the room began spinning around me. I grabbed the desk to stop myself from collapsing because for the first time in my life, I realized my own children might have murdered their father for money. And deep down, I knew this nightmare was only beginning. The next morning I went to the hospital demanding answers. But the terrified nurse I spoke with accidentally revealed a secret my sons had desperately tried to bury forever. The next morning I barely recognized myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen from crying. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The woman staring back at me looked 20 years older overnight. But despite the fear twisting inside my chest, I knew I had to go to the hospital. I needed the truth. The drive there felt endless. Every traffic light made my heart pound harder. I kept hearing Victor's voice in my mind, remembering the way he used to laugh while driving beside me. I would have given anything to hear that laugh one more time. When I arrived at Memorial Valley Hospital, the lobby smelled strongly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Nurses moved quickly through the halls while families sat crying quietly in waiting areas. For a moment I almost lost my courage. But then I remembered the message. Victor was poisoned. Slowly I approached the reception desk. I'm Margaret Hollow, I said softly. My husband Victor Hollow died here 3 days ago. I need to see his medical records. The young receptionist looked uncomfortable immediately. I'm sorry, ma'am. Those records are restricted. Restricted? My stomach tightened painfully. Restricted by who? She hesitated before answering. Your son's already collected most of the paperwork. That sentence hit me like ice water. Daniel and Simon had been here before me. Of course they had. Trying to stay calm, I asked if anyone involved in Victor's treatment was available. After several minutes, a middle-aged nurse finally approached me near the hallway. Her badge read Nurse Elaine Parker. The moment I mentioned Victor's name, her face changed. Fear. Real fear. I noticed it instantly. Mrs. Hollow, she whispered carefully, glancing around the hallway, you shouldn't ask questions here. My heart nearly stopped. What do you mean? She leaned closer. The injuries your sons described, they didn't match your husband's condition. I felt dizzy. What are you saying? The nurse swallowed hard before speaking again. There were no explosion burns. Your husband arrived unconscious with severe poisoning symptoms. Poisoning. Hearing the word out loud made my legs weak. I grabbed the counter to steady myself while tears filled my eyes. No, that can't be true. I'm sorry, she whispered. The toxicology results found methanol in his bloodstream. Methanol. I had heard of it before. Industrial alcohol. Dangerous enough to destroy organs slowly and painfully. My husband didn't die instantly. He suffered. The nurse looked terrified now. Your sons told administration to keep the poisoning confidential. They said you were emotionally unstable and couldn't handle the details. My sons. My own children lied about Victor's death. Suddenly every strange thing started connecting together. My name is Margaret Hollow. I'm 67 years old. And before all this happened, I truly believed a mother's love could survive anything. I believed no matter how far children drifted, deep inside they still carried goodness in their hearts. I was wrong. The day we buried my husband Victor was cold, gray, and painfully quiet. The cemetery sat on the edge of our small town, surrounded by old oak trees that creaked softly in the wind. Rain had fallen all morning, turning the ground wet and muddy. My shoes kept sinking into the earth while I stood beside Victor's coffin, trying not to collapse. 43 years together. 43 years of marriage, reduced to a wooden box beneath dark clouds. But I still remember staring at that coffin, unable to breathe properly. My chest hurt so badly it felt like someone had placed a stone over my heart. Victor wasn't just my husband. He was my entire world. We met when I was 23 years old and working at a tiny grocery store near the highway. He repaired old engines at his father's garage and always came in covered with grease and smelling like gasoline. He used to smile at me every morning. That smile saved me from loneliness more times than he ever knew. We built our entire life together from nothing. No money. No rich family. Just love, hard work, and sacrifice. We raised 2 boys in a tiny house with leaking windows and broken heaters. Victor worked himself sick to provide for us while I stitched clothes late into the night to pay bills. And now he was gone. At least, that's what I believed. The doctors claimed Victor died after a terrible machine explosion at his workshop 3 days earlier. They said the burns and injuries were severe. I barely saw his face in the hospital because bandages covered most of him. At the time, grief blinded me. I trusted my sons Daniel and Simon when they handled everything. But standing there at the funeral, something felt wrong. Daniel looked nervous instead of heartbroken. He kept checking his expensive watch every few minutes while pretending to comfort guests. Simon stood with his hands in his pockets, avoiding eye contact completely. Even their wives acted strange. Melissa whispered constantly into Daniel's ear while secretly staring at me. Nobody cried. Nobody truly mourned. It felt less like a funeral and more like people impatiently waiting for something to end. Then suddenly, my phone vibrated inside my purse. At first I ignored it. But seconds later it vibrated again. And again. Slowly I pulled it out. Unknown number. I opened the message. And instantly felt every drop of blood leave my body. Margaret. I'm alive. Don't trust the boys. I actually stopped breathing. My vision blurred. The cemetery spun around me while the pastor continued speaking in the background. Dirt hit the top of the coffin with dull, heavy sounds, but I barely heard it anymore. My hands shook violently as I typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. I can't explain now. They're watching you. I looked up instinctively. Daniel was staring directly at me. Not sadly. Not lovingly. Fearfully. Real fear. That was the exact moment my entire reality cracked apart. Deep inside, a horrible thought began growing in my chest. What if Victor never died in an accident? And worse, what if my own sons knew exactly what happened to him? But I still had no idea how monstrous the truth really was. That same night, unable to sleep after the funeral, I walked into Victor's workshop searching for answers. And what I discovered hidden inside his desk made my blood run cold. The rushed funeral. The fake accident story. The insurance changes. The pressure to sell the house. Oh, this wasn't greed anymore. This was murder. And then the nurse grabbed my wrist tightly. "There's something else," she whispered nervously. "Before your husband lost consciousness, he kept trying to say one word." My breathing stopped. "What word?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Sons." I felt the entire world collapse around me. That afternoon, after leaving the hospital in shock, I went to the bank to check Victor's accounts, and discovered thousands of dollars had vanished before his death. I left the hospital feeling like the ground beneath my feet no longer existed. The cold air outside hit my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside me. Victor hadn't died in an accident. My sons lied to me. The hospital records were hidden intentionally. And worst of all, my husband's final word may have been pointing directly at Daniel and Simon. I sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. Part of me still wanted to deny it. A mother's heart refuses to believe her children are monsters. Even after everything, some foolish piece of me still searched for another explanation. But then I remembered the insurance papers. The secret messages. The fear in Daniel's eyes at the funeral. And no matter how hard I tried, the truth kept getting darker. That's when another thought suddenly struck me. Money. For months Daniel and Simon acted obsessed with Victor's finances. Insurance policies. Property papers. Bank accounts. They constantly pushed him to sell the house. At the time I thought they were trying to help us retire peacefully. Now it felt horrifying. Without wasting another second, I drove straight to the local bank where Victor and I had kept our savings for over 30 years. Mrs. Grant, the elderly bank manager, recognized me immediately. Her face softened with sympathy. "Oh, Margaret. I'm so sorry about Victor." I forced a weak smile. "Thank you. I need help reviewing our accounts." At first everything looked normal. Our checking account still held the small retirement savings Victor and I built over decades. But when Mrs. Grant printed the transaction history from the last 6 months, my blood turned cold. Large withdrawals. Repeated withdrawals. $3,000. $5,000. $2,000 more. Nearly $15,000 missing. My hands began shaking uncontrollably. "What is this?" I whispered. Mrs. Grant adjusted her glasses nervously. "Your husband authorized the withdrawals personally." "No," I said immediately. "Victor would never remove that much money without telling me." She hesitated. "Well, he wasn't always alone." A terrible feeling rose inside my chest. "Who came with him?" Mrs. Grant looked uncomfortable. "Usually your son Daniel. Sometimes Simon too. They said they were helping your husband with paperwork because his eyesight was getting worse." My stomach twisted violently. Victor's eyesight was perfectly fine. That was a lie. "Can I see the withdrawal slips?" I asked quietly. Mrs. Grant handed me copies. The signatures looked like Victor's handwriting, but something felt wrong. The letters were shaky and uneven, like someone forced him to sign quickly. Suddenly I couldn't breathe properly again. My sons didn't just lie about Victor's death. They were already taking his money before he died. Then my phone vibrated once more. Unknown number. I opened the message with trembling fingers. They were desperate. "Check Daniel's debts. Victor found out the truth before they poisoned him." Debts? My heart pounded harder. What debts? And how far would my sons go to hide them? At that exact moment the bank doors opened behind me, and Daniel walked inside. The moment he saw me standing there holding the account papers, the color drained completely from his face. Daniel tried pretending everything was normal, but later that night I secretly followed him, and what I witnessed outside an abandoned warehouse terrified me beyond words. The moment Daniel saw the bank papers in my hands, his entire expression changed. For 1 second, just 1 second, I saw pure panic in his eyes. But then, just as quickly he forced a smile onto his face. "Mom," he said nervously. "What are you doing here?" I stared at him without answering. Suddenly I noticed things I had ignored for years. The dark circles under his eyes, the constant shaking in his fingers, the way sweat gathered near his forehead even though the bank was cold. Fear. Real fear. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied quietly. Daniel glanced toward Mrs. Grant immediately. "I was just helping Dad organize finances before." His voice cracked slightly. "Before the accident." Accident. Hearing that word made anger rise inside my chest like fire. I wanted to scream at him right there. I wanted to demand the truth about Victor, the poison, the missing money, everything. But something stopped me. Instinct. Deep down, I knew Daniel was hiding something far bigger than simple greed. So instead of confronting him, I pretended to believe him. "I understand," I said softly. "I'm just overwhelmed." The relief on his face appeared instantly. Too instantly. That alone told me he expected suspicion. After a few awkward minutes, Daniel kissed my forehead and quickly left the bank. But as I watched him walk away, another feeling crept into my chest. Terror. Because my son looked like a desperate man running out of time. That evening I couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious text message. "Check Daniel's debts." Around 9 o'clock I noticed headlights outside my living room window. Daniel's black SUV slowly pulled away from the curb. And without even fully thinking, I grabbed my coat and followed him. Rain poured heavily as I drove several cars behind, trying not to lose sight of him. My heart pounded violently the entire time. Part of me knew this was dangerous. But another part needed answers more than safety. Daniel drove far outside town toward the industrial district near the river. The area was almost abandoned now. Old warehouses, broken fences, rusted buildings. The kind of place where nobody asks questions. Finally, he stopped near a large warehouse with shattered windows. My stomach tightened immediately. Another car was already waiting there. Daniel stepped out quickly, looking nervous. Then 2 large men emerged from the shadows. Even from inside my car I could tell they weren't ordinary businessmen. One grabbed Daniel by the collar violently. I lowered my window slightly and heard shouting through the rain. "You promised we'd get the insurance money this week." Daniel looked terrified. "I'm trying. My mother's becoming suspicious." Suspicious. Hearing those words made ice run through my veins. Then the second man spoke coldly. "If the old woman talks to police, you're dead too." Dead too. Suddenly I realized Daniel wasn't fully in control of this nightmare. He was trapped in something much darker. And then, something happened that made my blood freeze completely. One of the warehouse doors opened behind them. A weak figure stepped partially into the light. Thin, gray hair. My heart nearly stopped. Because for one impossible second, the man looked exactly like Victor. I wanted to run toward him immediately. But before I could move, I heard Daniel say something horrifying about his own father. And it changed everything forever. Rain hammered against my windshield while I sat frozen inside the car, unable to breathe. That figure standing near the warehouse door. It looked exactly like Victor. For one impossible moment, hope exploded inside my chest so powerfully it hurt. My hands shook violently as I leaned forward, trying to see through the darkness and rain. Could he really be alive? No. It couldn't be possible. I watched carefully while the man stepped slightly into the yellow warehouse light. His posture looked weak. One shoulder leaned lower than the other, exactly the way Victor stood after hurting his back years ago repairing engines. My heart started racing so hard I thought I might faint. Then Daniel turned toward the figure angrily. "You should have finished this already," he shouted. The larger man beside him grabbed Daniel roughly by the jacket. "Keep your voice down, idiot." Daniel looked terrified now. "I gave you everything I had. I already signed over Dad's insurance documents." Insurance documents. The rain suddenly felt colder. The second man stepped closer to Daniel slowly. "Your father was supposed to die quietly. But now your mother's asking questions." My entire body went numb. There was the truth. Victor's death was planned. And my sons were involved. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying out loud. Tears streamed down my face while memories flooded my mind. Victor teaching Daniel how to ride a bicycle, staying awake all night when Simon had pneumonia as a child, working overtime for years to pay for their schools. He sacrificed everything for them. And they betrayed him for money. Huh? What kind of children become monsters like this? Then suddenly the weak figure near the warehouse coughed loudly. Daniel turned toward him nervously. Please, Daniel whispered desperately, just let me talk to Mom first. She trusts me. The tall man laughed coldly. She trusted Victor too. That sentence sent fear exploding through my chest. Something was terribly wrong. Victor wasn't simply murdered for insurance money. There was something bigger happening here. And then the weak figure stepped fully into the light. I nearly screamed. It was Victor. Older. Pale. Weak. But alive. Bruises covered his face. One eye looked swollen. He moved slowly like someone badly injured. My husband was alive, standing only yards away from me after I buried him 2 days earlier. I reached for the car door instantly. But before I could open it, I heard Victor speak weakly. Margaret must never get involved. Tears flooded my eyes immediately. Even after everything, he was still trying to protect me. Then one of the men suddenly grabbed Victor violently by the arm and shoved him back inside the warehouse. Victor cried out in pain. That sound shattered something inside me. Without thinking, I opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. And that's when my foot snapped a small branch beneath me. Frick. Every head turned toward my direction instantly. Daniel's face went completely white. Mom? The moment Daniel recognized me hiding outside the warehouse, the armed men rushed toward my car, and I realized I might never escape alive. The second Daniel saw me standing in the rain, panic exploded across his face. Mom, he shouted. Run. Hearing that terrified scream from my own son made my blood freeze. The two men turned instantly toward me. Their expressions changed from shock to rage in seconds. One reached inside his jacket while the other started running directly toward my car. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the wet pavement. For a moment my body refused to move. My mind couldn't process what was happening. Victor was alive. My sons were involved with dangerous criminals. And now strangers were chasing me through a deserted industrial yard in the middle of the night. Then Daniel screamed again. Get out of here. That finally broke my paralysis. I jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut just as one of the men reached the car. His fist smashed against the window violently. Open the damn door. Oh, I've never been so frightened in my entire life. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried starting the engine. The key slipped twice before finally turning. Tires screeched loudly against the wet pavement while the men shouted behind me. Then I saw Victor. He had managed to reach the warehouse doorway again. Weakly, painfully, he lifted one trembling hand toward me. Not to stop me. To warn me. Tears blurred my vision as I drove away into the storm. The entire ride home felt unreal. My breathing came in sharp, painful gasps while memories and questions crashed through my head endlessly. Why was Victor alive? Why fake his death? Who were those men? And worst of all, how deeply were Daniel and Simon involved? By the time I reached home, it was almost midnight. I locked every door, closed every curtain, and sat trembling in the dark living room clutching Victor's old sweater against my chest. But I felt completely alone. Then my phone rang. Daniel. For several seconds I just stared at the screen. Finally I answered. Mom, he whispered urgently, listen carefully. You are in danger. In danger. I snapped through tears. Your father is alive. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Daniel started crying. Real crying. I never wanted this, he whispered brokenly. I swear to God, Mom. I never thought it would go this far. My anger exploded instantly. You poisoned your father. No, he shouted desperately. We didn't poison him. We only owed money. I froze. What? Daniel's breathing became uneven. Simon borrowed money from dangerous people 2 years ago. Gambling, investments. I don't even know anymore. The debt kept growing. Dad found out and refused to help. My stomach twisted painfully. Then what happened? For several seconds Daniel said nothing. And when he finally spoke again, his voice sounded terrified. They threatened to kill all of us, Mom. A cold chill ran through my entire body. They forced Dad to fake his death for the insurance money. Fake his death. Suddenly everything started making horrible sense. But before I could ask another question, Daniel whispered something that made my heart stop. They have Simon now. Daniel begged me not to call the police. But minutes later, someone knocked slowly on my front door, and what I saw through the window nearly made me scream. Part 8. The knock at midnight. The moment Daniel whispered, "They have Simon now," a slow knock echoed through my house. Knock. 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 Every hair on my body stood up instantly. Daniel heard it too through the phone. "Mom," he whispered fearfully. "Who's there?" I couldn't answer. The knocking came again, louder this time. My hands trembled violently as I lowered the phone and slowly turned toward the front window. The living room was dark except for the weak yellow lamp beside Victor's old chair. Rainwater slid down the glass while the porch light flickered outside. For one terrifying second, I thought those men had found me. Then I saw the silhouette standing at the door. Weak. Barely able to stand upright. My heart nearly exploded. "Victor," I whispered. I dropped the phone and rushed to unlock the door. The moment it opened, my husband collapsed forward into my arms, soaking wet from the storm. He looked pale and exhausted. Bruises covered his face and neck, and his breathing sounded shallow and painful. I started crying immediately. For 2 days I believed I buried him. And now he was here. Alive. "Close the door," he whispered weakly. Quickly. I locked every bolt while helping him toward the couch. His body felt frighteningly thin beneath his jacket. Victor had always been strong. Broad shoulders, rough mechanic hands, steady movements. But now he looked broken. Seeing him like that shattered me inside. "What did they do to you?" I cried softly. Victor closed his eyes painfully. "It got out of control." I grabbed blankets and wrapped them around him while tears streamed down my face. For several moments neither of us spoke. I simply held his hand tightly, terrified he might disappear again. Finally Victor looked at me. "I'm sorry, Margaret." "No," I whispered immediately. "Don't apologize. Just tell me the truth." He stared toward the rain-covered window before speaking. Simon owed over $200,000 to men connected with illegal gambling operations. Daniel tried helping him pay it back secretly, but the debt kept growing. When they couldn't pay anymore, the threats started. My chest tightened painfully. "They threatened you?" Victor nodded slowly. "At first they wanted the house. Then the insurance policy. They said if we cooperated, everyone would survive." "But the poisoning?" I asked shakily. Victor looked ashamed. "They drugged me enough to fake severe illness symptoms. One corrupt doctor helped create false records. The plan was simple. Fake my death, collect the insurance money, disappear quietly." My mind reeled trying to process it all. "But why keep you alive?" Victor's expression darkened. "Because after the insurance money came through, they planned to kill me for real." Cold terror flooded my body. Then suddenly Victor grabbed my hand tightly. "Margaret, listen carefully. We can't trust anyone right now. Those men think you know nothing." Before I could respond, headlights suddenly flashed across the living room walls. A car was pulling into our driveway. Victor's face drained of color instantly. "They found me." Victor tried escaping through the back door. But when we looked outside, 3 armed men were already surrounding the house. The headlights outside grew brighter until the entire living room glowed white through the curtains. My heart started pounding so violently I could barely breathe. Victor struggled to stand from the couch, wincing in pain as he grabbed the edge of the table for support. He still looked terribly weak from whatever those men had done to him inside that warehouse. "Back door," he whispered urgently. "We have to move now." I rushed beside him, helping him walk through the dark hallway while rain hammered against the roof above us. Every sound felt louder. Every second felt dangerous. Then another car door slammed outside. Voices. Male voices. One of them shouted loudly enough for us to hear. "Search the house." A fear shot through me like ice water. They knew Victor was here. We reached the kitchen just as flashlight beams swept across the front windows. Victor pulled open the back curtain slightly and immediately froze. My stomach dropped when I looked outside. 3 men. One near the garage. One beside the back fence. And another standing directly near the rear door holding what looked like a handgun beneath his jacket. We were surrounded. My knees nearly gave out. Victor lowered the curtain slowly. "No escape," he whispered. The front door rattled violently. Bang. 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 Open up. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying aloud. Then suddenly my phone vibrated inside my pocket. Daniel. Victor looked at the screen and nodded quickly. Answer it. My trembling fingers nearly dropped the phone. Mom. Daniel whispered frantically. Are they there? Yes. I cried softly. Victor's with me. I heard Daniel curse under his breath. Listen carefully, he said urgently. There's an old storm cellar beneath Dad's workshop. Remember the storage hatch under the tool bench? Victor's eyes widened immediately. I forgot about that place, he whispered. Daniel continued quickly. It connects to the drainage tunnel near the river. You can escape through there. Another violent bang shook the front door. Move now. Daniel shouted. Victor grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back hallway. We slipped outside through the laundry room entrance while thunder exploded overhead. Rain soaked us instantly as we ran toward the workshop behind the house. Behind us, I heard glass shatter inside the living room. They were inside. Panic burned through my chest while Victor struggled beside me. His breathing sounded painful and uneven, but he kept moving. The workshop door slammed shut behind us just as flashlight beams crossed the backyard. Hurry, Victor whispered. We rushed toward the large wooden tool bench in the corner. Victor shoved old boxes aside with shaking hands until finally revealing a rusted metal hatch hidden beneath the floor. Footsteps echoed outside the workshop. They were close. Very close. Victor pulled the hatch open with a painful groan. A dark, narrow tunnel disappeared beneath us into complete darkness. Go first, he whispered. But before I could climb down, the workshop door exploded open behind us. And standing there in the rain with a gun pointed directly at Victor's chest was Simon. My own son. Simon looked terrified, exhausted, and completely broken. But then he said 5 horrifying words that changed everything again. For a moment, nobody moved. Rain pounded against the workshop roof while Simon stood in the doorway pointing the gun toward Victor with trembling hands. His clothes were soaked, his face bruised, and his eyes looked red like he'd been crying for hours. He barely looked human anymore. He looked destroyed. Simon, I whispered weakly. The moment he heard my voice, his entire expression cracked apart. Tears filled his eyes instantly. Mom, please. His voice shook badly. Please don't make this harder. Victor slowly stepped in front of me protectively despite his injuries. You're not going to shoot your own father, he said quietly. Simon lowered the gun slightly. For one hopeful second I thought everything might end peacefully. Then headlights flashed outside the workshop again. The other men were coming. Simon looked over his shoulder fearfully before turning back toward us. You don't understand, he whispered desperately. They said they'd kill all of us if we didn't finish this tonight. Finish this. My chest tightened painfully. Victor stared directly at him. How much do you owe them? Simon covered his face briefly with one shaking hand. 400,000. I nearly collapsed hearing that number. $400,000. How? I cried. How could this happen? Simon looked ashamed beyond words. It started with sports betting, he whispered. Then online gambling. Then loans to cover other loans. Every time I lost money, I thought one more bet would fix everything. Tears streamed down his face now. But it only got worse. Victor closed his eyes painfully. All those years, he whispered. And you never told us. I was scared. Simon shouted suddenly. Dad, they threatened my wife. They threatened my daughter. That sentence hit me like a knife. My granddaughter. Those monsters threatened an innocent child. Simon's entire body shook violently now. When you refused to sell the house, he said to Victor, they came after Daniel and me. They said either we cooperate, or they start killing family members one by one. Suddenly I understood the fear in Daniel's eyes at the funeral. The fake smiles. The panic. My sons weren't evil masterminds controlling everything. They were drowning. And dangerous men were pulling them deeper every day. Then Simon looked directly at me with unbearable guilt. I never wanted to hurt Dad, he whispered brokenly. The poisoning wasn't supposed to kill him. They only wanted him unconscious long enough to fake the death. Victor stared at him silently. But after the insurance money clears, Simon continued, they plan to murder Dad for real, and probably Daniel too. Cold terror swept through the room. We were never part of the plan. We were disposable. Suddenly loud footsteps approached outside. Voices shouted through the storm. "They're in there." Simon panicked instantly. "Go," he cried, lowering the gun completely. "Take the tunnel and run." Victor grabbed my hand while Simon pulled the workshop shelf sideways, blocking part of the entrance. "You're coming with us," I cried. But Simon shook his head slowly. "No. Somebody has to stop them." Tears exploded down my face. He was still my son. Broken, lost, terrified, but still my son. Then Simon looked at Victor one final time. "I'm sorry, Dad." And before either of us could stop him, Simon turned back toward the workshop door just as armed men burst inside. Gunshots exploded through the room. Victor shoved me down toward the tunnel hatch immediately. And the last thing I saw before darkness swallowed us below was Simon screaming while blood spread across his shirt. Deep beneath the workshop, Victor revealed a secret he had hidden from me for over 20 years. And it explained why dangerous men were truly hunting our family. The tunnel beneath the workshop smelled like wet dirt, rust, and old wood. I could barely breathe properly while Victor pulled me forward through the darkness. Behind us, muffled shouting and distant gunshots echoed above our heads. Every sound made my heart jump painfully. And Simon. I couldn't stop thinking about Simon. The image of blood spreading across his shirt replayed endlessly inside my mind. I wanted to go back. I wanted to save my son. But Victor kept pulling me deeper through the narrow underground passage. "Keep moving," he whispered urgently. The tunnel stretched beneath the property for what felt like forever. Water dripped from cracked pipes overhead while weak flashlight beams danced across the dirt walls. Victor's breathing sounded heavier with every step. He was exhausted, injured, and barely staying upright. Finally, after several minutes, we reached a small concrete chamber near the river drainage exit. Victor leaned against the wall, breathing painfully while I tried holding back tears. "Simon," I whispered shakily. Victor closed his eyes. "He bought us time." That sentence shattered me. For years I thought my greatest fear would be losing my children. I never imagined they'd destroy themselves trying to survive. Then Victor suddenly looked toward me with an expression I hadn't seen in decades. Fear mixed with guilt. Real guilt. Something inside me tightened immediately. "What is it?" I asked quietly. Victor sat heavily on an old wooden crate before speaking. "There's something I never told you." The seriousness in his voice terrified me. "What do you mean?" For several moments he just stared at the floor. Then finally he whispered, "Those men aren't only after insurance money." Cold air seemed to leave my lungs. Victor rubbed his shaking hands together slowly. 22 years ago, before Daniel and Simon were married, I worked with a transportation company outside Chicago. It looked legitimate from the outside, but eventually I discovered they were laundering money for organized crime groups. My stomach twisted painfully. "What?" Victor nodded weakly. "I didn't know at first. But after I found out, I secretly copied financial records proving millions of dollars were moved through fake accounts." My mind struggled to process his words. "You went to the police?" Victor looked away. "No." "Why not?" His voice cracked. "Because one of my coworkers disappeared after trying." Fear crawled through my chest. Victor continued quietly. "I stole the records instead. I thought if anything ever happened to me, the files could protect our family." I stared at him in shock. "All these years, you kept this secret?" Victor nodded slowly. "I hid the evidence where nobody would ever find it." Suddenly everything started connecting together. The threats. The fake death. The desperation. Those men weren't simply collecting debt anymore. They were hunting something. Then Victor looked directly into my eyes. "A month ago, Daniel accidentally mentioned an old storage locker while talking to one of those men. I realized they somehow discovered the records still existed." My pulse quickened. "The files are still hidden?" Victor reached slowly inside his jacket and pulled out a small silver key attached to a faded leather chain. "I never retrieved them." My entire body went cold. Those criminals poisoned Victor, terrorized our sons, destroyed our family, all because of evidence hidden for over 20 years. Then suddenly Victor grabbed my wrist tightly. "They'll never stop chasing us until those files are found." Before I could answer, distant sirens echoed faintly somewhere above the storm. "Police! But Victor's terrified expression didn't change. Instead, he whispered something that made my blood freeze completely. "Margaret, we can't trust the police either." Victor revealed that one police officer had secretly worked with those criminals for years. And the moment he said the officer's name, I felt my entire world collapse again. Rainwater rushed loudly through the drainage tunnel while distant police sirens echoed somewhere above us. But instead of relief, Victor looked terrified. That frightened me more than anything else. I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean we can't trust the police?" Victor gripped the silver key tightly in his trembling hand. "The organization hunting us has people everywhere," he whispered. "Lawyers, doctors, bank employees, even police." A cold chill spread through my entire body. "No," I said softly. "Who?" Victor hesitated, then slowly spoke the name. "Detective Harris." The moment I heard it, my stomach dropped. Detective Owen Harris had known our family for nearly 15 years. He attended town events with us. He shook Victor's hand at church gatherings. After the supposed accident, he personally visited our home offering condolences. I remembered him standing in my kitchen only days earlier saying, "We'll investigate everything carefully, Mrs. Hollow." Wise. All wise. Victor rubbed his face painfully. 20 years ago, Harris worked security for that transportation company before becoming a police officer. I didn't realize he was connected until recently. My thoughts raced wildly. So he helped cover everything up? Victor nodded weakly. When those men discovered the financial records still existed, Harris tracked me down first. He pretended to reopen an old investigation, but really he wanted the evidence. Suddenly every piece of this nightmare connected together. The fake medical reports. The hidden toxicology results. The rushed funeral. The silence. Powerful people had been controlling everything from the beginning. And my family was trapped in the middle of it. Victor looked exhausted now. His breathing had become uneven again. I could see how much pain he was hiding beneath his calm voice. "We need to disappear before Harris finds us," he whispered. But I shook my head immediately. "No more running." Victor looked surprised. "Margaret." No, tears filled my eyes again. "Our family is destroyed. Simon might be dying. Daniel's terrified. We've lost everything already." My voice cracked. "I'm tired of being afraid." For several seconds Victor simply stared at me. Then, slowly he smiled. A weak, tired smile. The same smile he gave me all those years ago inside that little grocery store. Even after everything, seeing it again nearly broke my heart. Suddenly Victor winced sharply and grabbed his side. Blood. Fresh blood soaked through part of his shirt. "Victor." I cried. "I'm fine," he lied immediately. But he wasn't. The poisoning, the beatings, the exhaustion. It was destroying him. We needed help fast. Then Victor suddenly pointed toward a narrow metal ladder at the end of the tunnel. "That exit leads near the old railway station," he whispered. "There's someone there we can still trust." "Who?" "My brother." I froze. Victor's brother Michael disappeared almost 18 years ago after a massive argument with the family. Daniel and Simon barely even remembered him. Victor always refused discussing what happened between them. "You never told me where he went," I whispered. Victor looked ashamed. "Because hiding him kept him safe." "Safe from what?" Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed faintly above the tunnel entrance behind us. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people. Victor's face turned pale instantly. "They found us." Then a familiar voice echoed from somewhere above. "Come." Terrifying. "Margaret, come out slowly. I only want the files." "Detective Harris." Victor pulled me deeper into the tunnel toward the railway exit. But when we finally reached Michael's hiding place, the door was already open and blood covered the floor inside. Victor grabbed my hand tightly as we climbed the rusted ladder toward the railway exit. Above us, the storm had finally started weakening, but thunder still rolled across the night sky. My legs felt numb from exhaustion and fear. Every second felt like we were running through a nightmare that refused to end. Behind us, Detective Harris's voice echoed faintly through the tunnel again. "Victor, you know there's nowhere left to run." Victor ignored him and pushed the heavy metal hatch open carefully. Cold air rushed into the tunnel as we climbed out beside an abandoned railway station hidden near the edge of town. The place looked forgotten by time. Broken benches. Rust-covered tracks. Old graffiti fading across cracked walls. Victor moved quickly despite his injuries, leading me toward a small building behind the station that looked like an abandoned maintenance office. "My brother's inside," he whispered. But something felt wrong immediately. The front door stood partially open. A weak yellow light flickered inside. And there was blood on the floor leading through the doorway. My entire body froze. Victor's face drained of color. "No," he whispered. He pushed the door open fully. The room inside looked destroyed. Furniture overturned. Papers scattered everywhere. Broken glass covered the floor. Someone had clearly searched the place violently. Then I saw him. A man lay slumped against the wall holding his side tightly. Blood stained his gray shirt while an old revolver rested beside him. Victor rushed forward instantly. "Michael." The injured man slowly looked up. He looked almost identical to Victor, only older and rougher. Same eyes. Same tired expression. But unlike Victor, Michael's face carried years of anger carved deeply into it. Even wounded, he looked dangerous. "You took your sweet time," Michael muttered painfully. Victor knelt beside him quickly. "Who did this?" "Harris's men." Michael coughed hard. "They came looking for the storage key." My stomach tightened immediately. Everything still came back to those hidden files. Michael noticed me standing near the doorway and gave a weak nod. "So you finally told her the truth, huh?" Victor looked ashamed again. There wasn't a choice anymore. A confusion filled my mind. "What truth?" I asked. Michael laughed bitterly despite the pain. "Your husband spent 20 years trying to protect this family while hiding the fact that those records could destroy half the town." Victor lowered his eyes silently. Michael continued weakly. "Politicians, police, business owners. They all used that transportation company for dirty money. If those files become public, dozens of powerful people go down." Cold fear spread through me again. This wasn't small anymore. It was enormous. Then Michael suddenly grabbed Victor's arm tightly. "Harris knows where the locker is," he whispered urgently. Victor's eyes widened. "How?" Michael coughed painfully again. "They tortured one of the old company accountants last month. He gave them partial information before dying." A panic exploded inside my chest. "If Harris reaches the locker first, he'll destroy everything," Michael interrupted. Silence filled the room. Victor slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out the silver key again. For years that tiny object had carried enough secrets to destroy lives. And now people were dying because of it. Then suddenly headlights flashed through the broken station windows outside. Several vehicles. Doors slamming. Voices shouting. Michael's expression darkened instantly. "They're here." Victor helped him stand weakly while I backed away from the window trembling. And then we heard Harris's voice outside once more. Closer this time. Much closer. "Victor, bring me the key, and maybe your wife survives tonight." Michael revealed there was one final copy of the evidence hidden inside the old storage locker. But reaching it meant walking directly into a trap Harris had already prepared for us. The abandoned railway office fell silent after Harris's voice echoed outside. Even the storm seemed quieter suddenly. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding inside my ears while Victor gripped the silver key tightly in his trembling hand. Michael leaned against the wall, struggling to stay conscious, blood still soaking through his shirt. Then Harris shouted again from outside. "Victor, this ends tonight." Flashlights moved across the station windows. Shadows crossed the broken glass while car engines idled outside. They had surrounded the entire area. Just like they surrounded our house. These people hunted us like animals. Victor looked toward Michael desperately. "There has to be another way out." Michael gave a weak laugh. "No," he coughed painfully. "But there is one advantage." Victor frowned. "What?" "Harris thinks the files are still inside the locker." I stared at Michael in confusion. "They aren't." Michael slowly shook his head. Relief flashed briefly across Victor's face, but it disappeared almost instantly when Michael continued speaking. "I moved the originals 6 years ago after someone started asking questions." My mind reeled. "Then what's inside the locker?" I asked. Michael's tired eyes met mine. "A trap." Outside, footsteps approached the building rapidly. Victor moved toward the window carefully while Michael reached for his revolver again despite his injuries. Harris won't stop until he sees proof the evidence is gone, Michael whispered. Which means we can still use the locker against him. Victor finally understood. You rigged it. Michael nodded slowly. Enough explosives to destroy the entire storage section. My breath caught painfully. Explosives? Victor looked horrified. Michael, people could die. Michael's expression hardened instantly. People already died, Victor. Simon. The accountant. Others we probably never even knew about. Silence filled the room again. Deep down, I knew he was right. Harris and those criminals would never let us walk away peacefully. Then suddenly Michael handed Victor a folded paper stained with blood. The real evidence location, he whispered weakly. If something happens to me, get this to federal investigators only. Nobody local. Victor stared at the paper like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Outside, Harris's voice grew impatient. I'm done waiting. Gunshots suddenly exploded through the station windows. Glass shattered everywhere. I screamed and dropped behind an overturned table while Victor pulled me down beside him. Michael fired back immediately, his revolver booming loudly through the tiny office. Chaos erupted instantly. More gunshots. Shouting. Flashlights cutting through darkness. Victor grabbed my shoulders tightly. Listen to me, he said urgently. Michael and I will draw them toward the storage yard. While they're distracted, you take the evidence location and escape. No. I cried immediately. But Victor's eyes filled with heartbreaking determination. Margaret. If we fail tonight, those people will keep hurting innocent families forever. Tears flooded my face. After 43 years together. I knew that expression. Victor had already accepted what might happen next. Then Michael kicked open the back door painfully. Time to finish this. The three of us ran into the darkness behind the railway station while armed men shouted nearby. Ahead of us, beyond rows of rusted train cars, stood the old storage lockers hidden near the tracks. And somewhere inside that yard, Michael's trap was waiting. As Harris and his men closed in around the storage lockers, Victor suddenly confessed something devastating about Simon. Something he had hidden from me since the warehouse shooting. Rain dripped steadily from the rusted storage buildings while we ran between abandoned train cars in the darkness. My lungs burned from exhaustion. Every part of my body hurt, but fear kept pushing me forward. Behind us, Harris's men shouted while flashlights cut through the night like knives. Victor suddenly grabbed my arm and pulled me behind an old freight container. Wait, he whispered urgently. Michael continued ahead toward the storage lockers carrying the revolver while Victor turned toward me with tears in his eyes. That terrified me immediately. After 43 years of marriage, I knew when my husband was about to say goodbye. No, I whispered shakily. Don't look at me like that. Victor cupped my face gently with trembling hands. There's something I hid from you. My chest tightened painfully. What? For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then finally, Simon didn't survive the warehouse. The world stopped. I stared at Victor, unable to breathe while cold rain ran down my face like ice water. Deep inside, I think part of me already knew the truth. A mother feels these things. But hearing the words destroyed me anyway. No, I whispered weakly. Victor closed his eyes painfully. He saved us, Margaret. When those men rushed the workshop, Simon stepped in front of the gunfire so we could escape through the tunnel. A broken sound escaped my throat. My little boy. The same child who used to sleep beside thunderstorms because loud noises scared him, died protecting us from monsters. My knees nearly collapsed beneath me. Victor held me tightly while I cried against his chest. He blamed himself for everything, Victor whispered. Before he died, he kept saying he was sorry. Sorry. Even after all his mistakes, Simon still died trying to save his family. Then distant shouting snapped us back to reality. They're over here. Victor looked toward the storage yard grimly. Margaret, listen carefully. He pressed the folded evidence paper into my hand. When this is over, give those files to federal authorities only. Tears streamed down my face. What about you? Victor forced a weak smile. The boys deserved better from me. Before I could answer, Michael suddenly shouted from ahead. Yow! A deafening explosion ripped through the storage yard. The ground shook violently beneath us as fire erupted across multiple lockers. Harris's men screamed while flames exploded into the night sky. Metal twisted. Windows shattered. Smoke filled the air instantly. Chaos. Pure chaos. Victor grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the far railway exit while Harris shouted furiously somewhere behind the flames. Then a gunshot echoed through the smoke. Victor stumbled suddenly. Blood spread across his side. Victor. He collapsed against me, breathing hard while Detective Harris emerged through the smoke holding a handgun. "It's over," Harris snarled. But before he could fire again, another gunshot rang out. Harris froze, then slowly collapsed onto the wet ground. Behind him stood Daniel, shaking, crying, holding the gun. Years later, after the trials finally ended, Daniel gave me something Victor had secretly written before everything happened. And those final words healed part of my broken heart forever. 3 years have passed since the night everything burned. 3 years since the explosions at the railway yard exposed decades of corruption hiding beneath our town. Federal investigators uncovered money laundering, bribery, illegal gambling operations, and multiple murders connected to Harris and the transportation company. The truth was uglier than any of us imagined. Michael survived after months of recovery. Daniel cooperated fully with investigators and testified against everyone involved. He served a short sentence for financial crimes but spent every day afterward trying to rebuild what remained of our family. Victor survived too. Barely. The gunshot damaged part of his liver, and the poisoning permanently weakened his body. He can no longer work on engines or lift heavy tools like before. But every morning he still sits beside the kitchen window drinking coffee exactly the same way he did 40 years ago. And sometimes, when sunlight hits his face just right, I thank God for giving me one more chance to see him alive. But Simon never came home. That pain never truly leaves. We buried him beside the lake he loved fishing at when he was a boy. Daniel visits the grave every Sunday carrying fresh flowers and sits there for hours talking to his little brother like he's still listening. Maybe he is. A year after the trials ended, Daniel handed me a small envelope he found hidden inside Victor's workshop desk. "Dad wrote this before everything happened," he whispered. My hands trembled opening it. Inside was a letter written in Victor's familiar handwriting. "Margaret, if you are reading this, then life has become harder than I ever wanted for you. I made mistakes trying to protect this family. Maybe terrible mistakes. But through every fear, every secret, every dark moment, loving you was the only thing I never regretted." Tears filled my eyes instantly. Victor continued. "Please don't let hatred destroy what remains of our family. Daniel and Simon lost themselves, but they were still our boys. Broken people can still carry love inside them." I cried harder reading those words than I had cried in years. Because Victor was right. Greed destroyed my sons. Fear destroyed our peace. Secrets destroyed our home. But love somehow survived everything. Today our old house still stands. The windows still rattle during storms. Victor's boots still sit near the front door. And every evening we sit quietly on the porch together watching the sunset like we used to when life was simple. Sometimes the scars still hurt. Sometimes nightmares still come. But after everything we survived, simply waking up beside each other feels like a miracle. And every now and then, when the wind moves softly through the trees near Simon's grave, I swear it sounds like forgiveness,